Good morning once again, everybody, and thank you for your introduction, Carlos. So Carlos was my doctoral student, just to let you know why. As Carlos put it about Michel de Certeau, I think one of the key notions for Michel de Certeau was communication. And it is a central notion for Ignatius too, as we already talked about with the 15th annotation, and I will go back to that. And I think that this notion of communication, because nowadays it's really challenged by the multiple ways of communication we have in our world, that it would be really good, as the new Pope told us, to really reflect on what it is to communicate. If we start from this quotation of the 15th annotation of the spiritual exercises, which, with this emphasis on God communicating himself, we see the importance of it. And but to better understand that, and because of the moment in which we are, in the time in which we are living, I think that the other issue we should focus on is the body, as I called my paper. But the way I will talk of the body took me a while before I could find it. And it's only really recently that I found a way through the spiritual exercises and the constitutions of Ignatius to understand what it was about. I'm not sure I've already... everything is clear, and certainly not. The thing, to put it very simply, I would say that I have been looking for the anthropology of Ignatius of Loyola, and as soon as you start reading the spiritual exercises, it's absolutely obvious that there is, like in the Western tradition of Christianity, this split between the body and mind, first of all, and body, mind, and soul. And it's absolutely obvious from the title of the spiritual exercises, and you know the explanation that Ignatius gives, that as well as there are some physical bodily exercises, we can have spiritual exercises. So in a way, body and spiritual are opposed. But then when you look, or when you do yourself the spiritual exercise, you know that because you need your body. We can't do anything without our body. And even Ignatius requires our body to be part of the journey, of the spiritual journey. So it was very difficult for me at the beginning to try to understand, so what is the meaning of spiritual, body, mind, soul? And it's very difficult to establish a lexic of Ignatius. But it is really recently that I understood, first of all because of my own experience, but also because I am listening to a lot of people, like probably a lot of us, giving the spiritual exercises or for spiritual accompaniment in the daily life. And because of my interest in many other things like healing and health issues and post-traumatic recoveries, I understand the importance of the movement. The movement, and nowadays a lot of people in neurosciences, for instance, or just the ordinary recovery for a physical trauma, they will explain you that you will recuperate if you move. 30 years ago, when I had my first, sorry to say that, but my first hernia, the doctor told me, stay in bed. And I stayed in bed for 3 months. Nowadays, if you have a big back pain, everybody will tell you, walk. It's painful, walk. Oh, okay, so the importance of the movement. And if you look at Ignatius' text, you will see how important the movement is. And if we speak a bit of Spanish, and we will all speak Spanish after my talk, motion, which is the way to describe the consolation and desolation, as you know, is key to the spiritual pedagogy of Ignatius. So in fact, what enables us to understand what is the link between the body, the spiritual life, but also, and that would be very important, our language, our spiritual language, which is articulated, is made for Ignatius through the movement. So that's the thing I will talk about. I won't refer to any other theologian because we had already heard a lot about them. I'm sorry to say, I will just try to open a conversation with my own research, which are related to many others. I owe a lot to Rahner, Balthasar, Theobald, Certeau, etc. But if I'm starting to make quotation of my references, I won't be able to say anything on my own. And I haven't made this trip to Hong Kong just to speak of the other one. So the importance of movement. As you can see here, that's something very important in the history of Christianity and the history of the Western and even Eastern Christianity. If you see this icon, it is very static. But there is a gesture, and this gesture, is the gesture of a blessing. But it is a fixed gesture. But we know that this static gesture means a blessing. But you see this iconic presentation, rather hieratic, is linked to the moment when this painting or this icon was made just after or in the discourse of the Nicene Council, when it was very important to focus on the divinity of Jesus Christ. Then, if you look at the third one, it's easy to see other gestures, but it's also static, in fact. But there are gestures, other gestures, and a lot of gestures. And what I find very interesting is the fact that it is not just about Jesus. And we know that in the history of the painting, we moved from a depiction of Jesus in icons towards groups or the constellation, as Balthasar would say, of people around Jesus. And that is very important. And there is a sort of body language through gesture, but they are static gesture. But as you can see in the middle, with this ivory plaque, which is a crucifixion, you can feel the movement. Even in the body of the dead Christ, you can feel in his clothes the movement. And if you can recognize some of the gesture, because of the way this ivory plaque is carved, you can see the movement from it. And if you look carefully at the left side, on the top, you have the hand of God. And from the hand of God, it is as if the movement was coming, like as if the wind was blowing through this image and shakes the body and the clothes. In short, that is what we are invited to experience through the spiritual exercises. How are we moved by God? And so that's my first point. That's this way. A certain way of communication. We already read and heard a lot of this 15th annotation, which was totally forgot during 3 centuries when the Jesuits were giving the spiritual exercises, because it was a major risk to be considered as mystic or quietist or any kind of heresy, and first of all Protestantism. So the Jesuits forgot about it, and it's really recently in the renewal of the spiritual exercises in the early 20th century that some theologians rediscover, and especially the first of all was Pierre Rousselot and Gérard and Maréchal in their studies about mysticism. and the Thomistic reading. What is very important about that? We already spoke of the immediate communication, but there is a big trap, because this sentence, if you look closely at it, it's really a double statement. There is what the spiritual director during a retreat shouldn't do. He shouldn't move. In Spanish, mover. You shouldn't move the retreatant. So, because you know that then we will talk of God, and God should rather, at least in a Western way of thinking, when you have this kind of statement, you think it will be a parallel or a symmetry. So if the spiritual director shouldn't move, it's because God moves you. Sorry, not at all. God, if there is just one thing to remember, is God doesn't move you. God communicates himself. And that's the big difference. And I will try to explain why is it so important. So for the moment, we can stay with that to see the difference between the two verbs, and you can read any of the translation from the Latin or in modern contemporary languages, it's absolutely clear. There is not a parallel between what the spiritual director shouldn't do to move and the God. So you see, if we go back to the time in which we are living today, with this question of what is communication, and if we go back to try to understand how do we communicate, what is the mission for Jesuit? Do we move people? Ignatius would say, yes, in certain times, but not in a retreat. But does God move people? The answer is not yes. It's not an obvious yes. There is something about movements. People should be moved during a retreat, and there is this famous annotation in the spiritual exercises that if somebody is not inquietus, is not moved, is not I wouldn't say anxious because it would be too much, but if somebody is too balanced, too quiet, you can't do anything, say Ignatius. That's the good news. He can deal with us. So there is something happening here. What is the communication? And the communication is God inflames you in his love, in his praise, disposing us towards the way in which we shall be better able to serve him in the future. So he doesn't do anything, God, as you can imagine, but he settles us in his burning love. But when somebody gives you his love, he's not communicating, or he's communicating what he feels for you, what he is for you, which is the translation or the explanation at the end of the spiritual exercises with the contemplation to attain love, or to reach love. But in fact, our movement towards God to reach his love is first of all the movement of God himself giving your love. So let's add this as a starting point. No? So the thing I would like to talk is a central explanation I can give is about this notion of movement. So motion in Spanish is, in contemporary Spanish as well, in the classic one, is the action and effects of moving and being moved. And the synonymous of motion is movimiento, movement, in its physical and spatial understanding. And then motion, movement means a transformation of the mind and soul. That's very interesting. The movement is what triggers transformation. Where does that come from? It comes from Plato, Aristotle, all the Greek philosophers, and the movement was the way to understand life, in fact. To put it very simply, movement is a very a key metaphysics concept. For instance, when you want to understand what is it to be born, what is it to die, it's a movement of alteration, degradation. What is, for instance, to acquire virtue? It's a movement. And this notion of movement was very, very central until the 17th century, at the moment when the early modern sciences understood and split, in fact, between the physical and the mental and mind understanding of human life. But at the time of Ignatius, in the Middle Age, as well as in the ancient Greece, it was the movement was not just moving, as we will understand today, to change space, which is just one category of movement. So there were four categories of movement: change, increase, change of place, as well as corruption and generation, which is a double concept, corruption, generation. Just to give an example, because that's very important to understand how Ignatius works, what is it to increase? So when you speak of movement at that time, what is very important, or the only thing to be important, is to focus on the end. What is the end of the movement? And the end of the movement will give the name of the movement. So when you grow, or when you become stronger, you strengthen. So there is no description at all on how you would grow. But the end is important. So that's the way the philosophers and Ignatius himself, because it was absolutely a cultural thing. And even in the theological understanding of it, it was very, very important. So if we go back to this 15th annotation, in what consists God's communication? If in the process of the spiritual exercises, I will recognize God's abundant love in the gift of my life, first week, with this cry of wonder, I'm alive. Which is the end of this first week, to be better united to God's grace. That's one of the sentences we always forgot when we speak of the first week, but that's the aim of the first week. So that's to be aware of God's abundant love giving to me, and then confronting it, or to make a comparison, and comparison is a key exercise in the spiritual exercises, with Jesus Christ, with his Son. What is it for Jesus to know that he is the beloved, and what it is for me to be one of his beloved? And to make a comparison, what is he doing from this notion of being loved, and what am I doing? And then you can see the gap. And do you want to go forward, to move forward? This notion of moving forward is absolutely key also to Ignatius. The other thing I would like to talk about is then the process itself of the spiritual exercises. I will soon run out of time, but just an example, an anecdote to start with. 7 years ago, 10 years ago, I was asked by a group of Ignatian nuns to give them a retreat. Some of them were in their 30s, some of them were in their late 70s. And because I thought, they have been doing the spiritual exercises all their life, what can I add? What can I say that they don't already know. And instead of making commentaries or preaching, etc., I just read some pieces of the spiritual exercises with them, and I was just underscoring the words when Ignatius speaks of the body and the gesture and the movement. And believe me or not, it was a real experience for all of us, for the nuns, when they said, and I could listen to them in the personal encounter, how powerful it was. And I didn't say anything, no comment, just underlining the word, so they understood how their body was involved in their spiritual life. Now, if you look to the spiritual exercises, and usually we don't do that, so I will invite you to do it yourself, to have a look on the mysteries of the life of Jesus Christ. Because nowadays, we are so good Christians that we read the gospel, but at the time of Ignatius, they didn't. And not for bad reasons, because Ignatius rewrote his summary of the gospel. So that sounds very heretic, to rewrite the Bible, but that's what Ignatius did. And what was he focusing on? He was focusing on movement. The best example I have is Our Lady, at the Nativity. What is, oops, I don't have to skip from the microphone. What is the Nativity according to Ignatius? First point, that's the invitation from Ignatius. Our Lady, almost 9 months pregnant, as you may devoutly think of her, and seated on a donkey with Joseph and a servant girl, taking with them an ox, set out from Nazareth for Bethlehem to pay the tribute which Caesar had imposed on all those lands. Composition, seeing the place. Here it will be to see the eyes of the imagination, the road from Nazareth to Bethlehem. And you see Mary sitting on a donkey. But when sitting on a donkey, she moves. So, and so many other scenes of the spiritual exercises, for instance, Magdalene, she runs at the foot of Jesus Christ. You can have a look on the gospel. She never ran anywhere. So the focus from Ignatius on this movement is really important. Why? And that would be my main point before going to my conclusion and opening up the conversation for nowadays, what I am making of all that. There will be a lot of other things to say. One other thing I would like to underline is, why is that so important? Movement was the way to understand what it is to be an agent, what it is to make decision. For us, or at least from the 17th century, 18th, so Descartes, Kant, the focus was on autonomy of the free will. But for Ignatius, we receive influences from the world, not only from God and the Spirit, but even from the object. I love this brush, and I will take it. Because for Ignatius, the attraction came from this object, and I found it so marvelous that I can't, sorry for that, I can't help stealing it. Or no, maybe I can make a decision. I won't steal it. Because I receive attraction from people, and it's quite famous, it's seen as a temptation, but we receive attraction, and we also receive attraction from spiritual beings. And to understand all this is about movement. And you can make decisions, and first of all, be aware of all the influences you receive from the people, from the world, and from God. And we receive influences, but then we have to make decision of it. And to learn how to make decision of among these multiple influences we all experience is very difficult. And the only thing we have to learn from the spiritual exercises is to be able to decipher which influence comes directly, not from God, but from the effect of reading what happens to Jesus and the people around him being shaken by all the movement they are making, and they are receiving also. And from that pattern of the gospel, to acknowledge in a similar way, oh, I can feel the same attraction to follow Jesus or to make a decision to go in that direction. And with a mindful operation of the recognition of the similarity between the movement, I can say that this attraction comes from God. So all this is about our agency made of activity, active decision, the free will, which was so important for Ignatius, and also from the receptivity. So there are some passive things among us that we can't change, our limitation, but there is also this ability within us to receive, and it has been really understood in the last 50 years by philosophers and theologians like Ricoeur, Martha Nussbaum, or James Keenan in moral theology. 2 minutes to conclude. So, where am I going? Because I'm talking of movement. So, I'm certainly a bit nervous about all that. But if we go back to our situation today and the importance of communication, as Ignatius would say, we shouldn't speak so much of grace that we will forget the free will. So there is a way today in our spiritual speeches among the church, even the Pope Francis, to think that God will move us directly. No. For Ignatius, there is an immediate communication from God through the mediation of Jesus Christ. This is the only way to recognize it. So it means that Ignatius wasn't speaking to the non-believer. It was not his point. But I think it is important to acknowledge it. It's not just about our emotion, our movement. No, not at all. The motion are nothing to do with emotion at first stand. It's an understanding of our agency and the influence and the choice we make about our agency. Yesterday, someone asked a very interesting and important question about how do we make decisions, and assuming that Jesuits were so used to make decisions that it was easy for them to make decisions. Oh yes, I can tell you, as a superior of the community, it's easy for me to make decisions and nobody will follow. So, no, what it is about, and I will finish with that. I think that, and I'm a bit critical about the synodality way of proceeding, because I think it missed something. For the Jesuits, first of all, we built, because we have the spiritual exercises, the constitution, and a way of living together. And this way of living together is more or less built on the habitus of making our retreat and praying, contemplating almost, I hope, every day, the life of Jesus Christ. So we are trained, it's a constant, it's a kind of habitus in the Thomistic term of recognizing the life of Jesus Christ and to compare it to our life. If you read the relation from the missionaries of the 17th century, it's absolutely obvious. So nowadays we say, oh, they were very bad anthropologists. No, it was their spiritual diary. So they were not making science. They were speaking of how what they were living in new mission territories were like the life of Jesus Christ or not. So that's the first thing. There is this habitus. There is another habitus from the Constitution. When a Jesuit is sent on a mission, he has to make decisions because the superior didn't plan everything. So, and there is a pattern within the Constitution, which is to make yourself indifferent, to look carefully to the place you are in, so to make an analysis, if you want, to consider, mirar in Spanish, and then to make your decision. So because you have these two patterns, you know, the contemplating way and which is the receptivity, and the acting way of making decision in a real situation. So these two patterns of agency, which is receptivity, and acting decision-making, builds an habitus of making decision and then to reform or to let new things happen. So I think that there won't be any synodality without this strong movement of contemplation within your life, which means, first of all, before making decision for the church, just being aware of what is your relationship to the love of God you receive, and by comparison with Jesus on the cross. So what am I doing from this love? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are very fortunate to have Michel Feydeau this morning as first speaker, because he did a marvelous introduction. So that's really facilitate my talk. My talk, in fact, is just a very concrete an example of what Michel Feydeau has introduced. In fact, a lot of speakers yesterday already have given some examples. So I will talk about Christoph Theobald, who is living theologian, who is colleague of Patrick and François Houvet, and a teacher of Carlos. So maybe, but knowing that he's, I say, completely unknown in the English-speaking world, not in Chinese-speaking world. So I think this is the first time, very good occasion to introduce him to us. So this Christoph Theobald. He's born in Germany, in Cologne. So he's not French, but later on he entered in the Society of Jesus. He entered in a French province, and he teaches and writes mainly in French, of course with German style. It's a bit difficult to read his French. We can see that he's a German. And Christoph Theobald, now in Europe, continental Europe is very renowned. As one of my professors in Louvain said he's number one at theology, number one. Of course, others may not be agreeing for that, but he's really renowned because he has received already 3 honoris causa from University of Laval, Catholic Louvain, and Fribourg, all are French-speaking university, and also a Theology Prize in Germany. And he also was appointed as expert for the Synod of Synodality last year, 2 years ago. Yeah. So just a summary of his theology. So his theology is based on God's gratuitousness and Jesus' holy hospitality or hospitable holiness. And from a static or a stylistic approach, he positions the church in a decentralized role vis-a-vis the human values of autonomy, freedom, otherness, responsibility, and a role or a mission in the service of these values, which can be expressed by what he calls the elemental faith. I don't know how to translate la foi élémentaire, Patrick. Elementary faith or elemental faith?
It's a reference to Durkheim, the
elementary. Yeah. So it's anyway. Later I'll explain. So maybe you can help me to translate with a better translation. So his theology is deeply Christocentric, contextualized, and mission-oriented system. As a Jesuit, His theological approach is influenced, of course, by Ignatian spirituality, and the purpose of this talk is to explore the relationship between his theological system and Ignatian spirituality, and how Ignatian spirituality has influenced and guided Theobald's theological development. So we will first introduce his own understanding of the Ignatian way of doing theology, and then examine how he has developed his theological system in accordance with this interpretation. And finally, we will analyze in what sense his theology contributes to the church reform, especially in its reform in a synodal perspective. So, Ignatian way of doing theology according to himself. In fact, he has written a lot of articles and even books about Ignatian spirituality. So I just introduce what he understands. He says Ignatian spirituality does not propose a particular theology, not as Dominicans, they have Thomist theology, but there's a way of proceeding. This is a way of proceeding. He puts forward three aspects of Ignatian way of doing theology. In fact, this morning, Michel Filou has introduced more than three. I think Theobald just synthesizes this way of doing theology into three aspects. So, in short, the first is unity of doctrine and life. The second is incarnational vision. And the third is decentralized attitude, or a spirit of withdrawal. So firstly, I just quote Theobald. Just as the spiritual exercises or the constitutions of the Society of Jesus are useful text, users' manuals or method that have their reason in practice, so the theological discourse exists in order to initiate an effective process of human and spiritual formation. Therefore, Ignatian way of doing theology consists in uniting discourse and doctrine with practice or life. In the spiritual exercises, doctrine refers to a style of life, a way of relating to God and others. For example, in a meditation or to standards, even though the apostles were sent to spread divine doctrine, they ultimately accomplished that mission through their lives. Therefore, doctrine and life, or content and form, are unified or one and the same in Ignatian spirituality. Secondly, being essentially practical, the modus procedendi in theologies of Ignatian tradition derives from the historical and infinitely varied characteristics of the experience of shaping a true life. So this is a quotation from Theobald. Ignatius believed that one can find God in all things. This is why Ignatian spirituality has an incarnational perspective that emphasizes historicity. This word is very important, especially in runners' theology. And I've got to say, Theobald is really a fan of runners. He was inspired or influenced mostly by God runner. Contextualization and plurality of human experiences. The question of how to find God and shape true life in diverse backgrounds and experience is a matter of discernment. The rule of discernment and election are at the center of the structure of the spiritual exercises, and therefore occupy an important place in Ignatian spirituality. As we shall see, it is on the basis of Ignatius' emphasis on the incarnational perspective and the spirit of discernment that Theobald's theology always takes as its point of departure diagnosis of the current situation of the society and the church. Normally, I think in English we should say analysis. but Theobald, he prefers this word, diagnosis. So thirdly, Theobald compares theologian's posture to that of spiritual director. So here we have a lot of spiritual directors. So, just as the spiritual directors disappears, you are still here because you are not guiding retreatants. Just as the spiritual directors disappears when the retreatant become free, having perfectly internalized the rule of discernment in the organization of his own life. So the theologian step aside before the journey of individuals and groups when they became themselves subject not only of their own history, but also of his theological understanding. So this is very important point. I will explain more later. Theobald also bases his posture of spiritual director and the theologian on the theology of God's gratuitousness that we will interest later on. Second point, so his own Ignatian way of doing theology, also according to this threefold structure. Firstly, I'm going to introduce, in fact, Christianity as a Style is a title of one of his most important book. Why style? So he has initiated stylistic theology. It's a systematic theology. So why style? Theobald's main theological concern is to think about a way out of the crisis that Christianity faces in postmodern Western European society. So it's contextualized. In Theobald's view, one of the reasons why the Christian faith or Christianity has lost its credibility is the dogmatism. This is a way of understanding and presenting the Christian faith in the perspective of truth. It tends to emphasize top-down general and universal principles, thus neglecting individual believers, as these principles are often disconnected from people's concrete lives. Theobald found that style is an expression that avoids the danger of dogmatism because it unites doctrine and life, or content and form, and better describes Christian identity. So what is style? Style, as understood by Theobald himself, combines the meaning given to it by three philosophers and theologians. So Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Friedrich Schleiermacher, and Hans-Urs Balthasar. So in fact, he combined Balthasar and Runner, so very opposite two Jesuit theologians. From a phenomenological perspective, Maurice Merleau-Ponty thinks that style is a way of inhabiting the world. In French, une manière d'habiter le monde. As for Schleiermacher, he believes from a hermeneutical perspective that the inspiration of the Bible exists in the unity of the Bible, of the biblical authors' thoughts, so content, and its expression form. So he called this unity style. Balthasar has developed a theological aesthetic and theological phenomenology as a way of perceiving the one figure of Christ and uniting beauty or style with Christian identity. So combining these three definitions, style in Christoph Theobald's thought is a way of inhabiting the world, expressing the concordance. He likes this word. Maybe in English it's better to say consistency. Concordance between content and form, doctrine and life, subjectivity and objectivity. So it is worth noting that although Theobald has adopted a static approach and has criticized the dogmatism that falls under the perspective of truth, his choice of style does not exclude the true and the good. On the contrary, style integrates the true and the good. into one, concretely presenting these two transcendentals in a manner of being in the world. So, third point, Christianity as a style. Theobald says it is the way in which faith is lived in and for the world that ultimately determines the truth of the content of faith. This style of living the faith in consistency between word and deed is, in Theobald's view, authenticity. He identifies authenticity with consistency or concordance, because authenticity as a key feature of the postmodern era can allow the Christian faith to become more credible. Theobald characterizes this style of authenticity or concordance more concretely as a process of encounter and relationship in the world, and thinks that the essence of the Christian faith consists in this process. For indeed, the revelation of Christ cannot be reduced to a simple communication of truth. It is a form of encounter which is not separated from the content of faith. So according to Theobald, the concept of style can denote the personality of Christianity itself. As Michel Feydeau says, the Christology is always at the center of all Jesuit theologians. It's same for Theobald. So Theobald developed Christology of the life of Jesus in the gospel. It's really in accordance with the spiritual exercises. He says it is, the reason why Christoph Theobald identifies the essence of Christian faith and Christian identity with a style which is manifested in the process of encounter and relationship is that this style is the way in which Jesus Christ himself lived in the world. The style of Jesus is at the center of Theobald's entire theological system. His theology is therefore highly Christocentric. He describes Jesus' style as holy hospitality or hospitable holiness, which consists also in accordance between thought, word, and deed. It is important to note that in addition to the concordance between doctrine and life, Theobald's theology is also clearly influenced by another dimension of the spiritual exercises, namely the contemplation of the life of Jesus. According to him, the holy hospitality of Jesus has two characteristics. One is messianic, and another is eschatological. After the exile in Babylon, the Israelites believed that Messiah will be the one who will bring peace to the world through four qualities. The first is his ability to learn humbly. In the gospel, Jesus refused to disclose his identity prematurely in order to be open to learning in all situations and from all people he encountered. The second is his self-abnegation, self-emptying, and self-withdrawing in favor of others. This is a way of being in a world that respects the otherness, altérité, of others and evokes others' elemental faith by gratuitous presence. We will, The third, we will explain what is elemental faith later. The third is that Theobald believes that the reason why Jesus did not write was that he wanted to use his short time on earth to be present with others as much as possible. So the fourth is the excess, in French, démesure, of Jesus in giving up his life for adapting himself to the limit, mesure of man. So it is in Jesus' attitude towards death that Theobald discovers the eschatological character of Jesus' hospitable holiness. That is a holistic vision of life, history, and creation in the face of death. So The second point, contextualized elemental faith. So I have already said his theology is really contextualized for the Western society. In Theobald's theological system, there are two very important terms, Christic faith and elemental faith. The innovative concept of elemental faith can be said to be the result of the emphasis of Theobald's theology on contextualization and historicity. And it is proposed for the postmodern society in Western Europe. Both the contextualization of his theology and the concept of his elemental faith embody the incarnational perspective of Ignatian spirituality and his effort to fight God in all things. Therefore, the analysis of the current social and ecclesial situation is at the forefront of Theobald's theology. This is also related to Ignatius' emphasis on the consistency between doctrine and life. For to speak of life is to speak of existential situation. For example, in his work on fundamental theology, Theobald has dedicated the whole first chapter of this book to diagnosis of Europe today. And in another book, Pastoral Imperative, which is divided into 3 parts, of which the entire first part was focused on a diagnosis of current situation. So according to Theobald's analysis, the challenges faced by the church include the exculturation. The exculturation means that the Christian culture is out of the Western society. So we're talking here in China, we are talking about inculturation. In Europe, we are already talking about exculturation. So it's the opposite of inculturation. Inculturation and the crisis of credibility. The social challenges to the church include transhumanism, secularization, laicization, religious pluralism, and ecological crisis. All in all, Theobald's theological reflections are mainly focused on these postmodern social and ecclesial issues in Western Europe. In such a society, Theobald's theological concern is to find a way to enhance the credibility of the Christianity and to find spiritual resources that would promote social harmony, peace, and sustainability. This is where Christic faith and elemental faith came into play. So let me define the Christic faith and elemental faith. He divides the two kinds of faith based on the relationship Jesus established with his disciples and those who sympathized with him, but without becoming his disciples. So his disciples have a Christic faith, and the latter have elemental faith. The reason why Theobald invents the neologism Christic faith instead of using Christian faith is that he established the style of Jesus as the only reference for whole Christian faith and all forms of the church. The Christic faith is the foundation, the standard, and orientation, and the reference of Christian faith. The elemental faith is an ontological faith, which Theobald defines as trust in life or credit to life. We can interpret this trust in life as a necessary act of living without ever being immediately given, a miraculous act which no one can perform in the place of another, and which is possible only by encountering others, which is only possible by encountering others in a particular social structure. It is often an act of courageous resistance against personal illness or collective plight, against evil and misfortune. The faith is therefore an expression of victory that still resonates in the word conviction. In short, elemental faith is a courage to be, which is the word of volatility, and trust in life that is rooted in human nature, and more precisely in the goodness of life and the promise it implies. 人性本善 in Chinese. Some of you understand. Theobald specifically emphasizes that elemental faith is evoked by encounters with others. The typical example is the people who met Jesus. I quote Theobald. In the encounter with Jesus, and thanks to his messianic capacity to generate faith, elemental acts of faith are born. Jesus succeeded in activating the sense of faith present in human beings for the benefits of the concordance and authenticity of the person in front of him. So those whose elemental faith is activated can also live with a style of consistency and authenticity. This way of inhabiting the world will certainly create harmony with others. And so people who live out their elemental faith are regarded by Theobald as spiritual resource for maintaining social peace. He also believes that elemental faith is oriented towards Christian faith, so is a gateway to the latter. It was because of this Ignatian incarnational perspective that Theobald sees not only crisis in current situation, but also opportunity, gailos. Why is this opportunity? Because Theobald believes that the current situation of the church in Western Europe may enable it to return to its decentralized posture, focusing solely on Christ and others. To be other-centered means to serve others, especially their elemental faith. So I just quote Theobald. Today, it is urgent to understand the Christian vocation or Christian mission as a concern for the elemental faith of all. We should regard Christ's concern for all as a criteria for examining and transforming the social structures that facilitate this faith or are insensitive to its destruction. As the time is going on, I just, faster. Third point, decentralized theology. Ignatian spirituality emphasizes on greater glory of God and on the fact that the spiritual director should give way to the relationship between God and man is decentralized attitude. It echoes John Baptist's words, "He must become greater, I must become less." In Theobald's view, the God who has revealed himself in his absolute gratuitousness is also the God who is able to conceal himself, to withdraw, to be silent, or the God who communicates himself to mankind by emptying himself, which is a kenotic gesture. Here again, we see a consistency between content and form in Theobald's theology. The theological content is the kenotic way in which the Holy Trinity reveals himself. It corresponds to the church's decentralized form of existence and the theologian's posture as ferryman. As we mentioned earlier, for Theobald, theology is a way of proceeding whose purpose is to serve people's understanding of faith and to shape the subject of faith. Once this mission is accomplished, theologians and theology itself should step down, as Jesus did. If it continues to maintain itself as a discipline or orthodox doctrine, like Thomism, I'm sorry to say that, but that's the reality. it will paradoxically lose its credibility. Of course, some are not agreeing with that, but okay. For only the kenotic and holy hospitality of Jesus is credible in the eyes of the people. This Ignatian way of doing theology can also be illustrated by the feature of John Baptist. He is the voice of one crying in the wilderness. The voice exists for communicating the message of the one crying, the word. And once the message is heard, the voice disappears. So it is with this. So it is with the mission of. It is same with the mission of theologians and theology. It's time. Do I still 2 minutes more for concluding? Yeah. Let me just summarize his contribution to the reform of the church. When Theobald considers the whole Christian faith as a style he injected into his theology a gene that would reform the church. We have mentioned that Theobald's theological effort consists in finding a way for increasing the credibility of the Christianity in today's postmodern society. And this way is his stylistic approach. Such approach would lead to challenging the existing ecclesial forms that have lost their credibility, such as dogmatism. We can also illustrate how Theobald's theology contributes to the church reform by referring to the threefold aspects of Ignatian spirituality. First, focusing on the present, which is historicity, contextualization, and by tracking back to the source, which is the relationship between Jesus and his disciples. This is really a fundamental principle with which Theobald's theology reforms the church. We could define the church in the simplest way as a history of relays and evangelical presence. I quote Theobald. In short, the church is the historical continuation of the evangelical mission of Jesus. Theobald considers the style of Jesus as the only reference for all forms of the church. All theological fields, such as tradition, ministries, liturgy, are to be reformed in the light of the holy hospitality of Jesus, in a particular cultural and historical context. Secondly, the style of Jesus' holiness is hospitality, and hospitality means going out and meeting people. Thus, Theobald's theology is in line with Pope Francis' reform direction, that is, to make the church an outgoing church. If it is the style of holy hospitality of Jesus that determines the nature of the church existence, then ecclesial spaces like the church, the churches, are not only churches. For Theobald, all the places where people can be encountered with holy hospitality are ecclesial spaces, like here. Yeah. Another point, which seems even more revolutionary, is that the church has always had a mission to serve the Christian faith and Christians. Is that true in a parish? And all parishes just serve the Christians and the Christian faith. But Theobald not only believes that the church should rather serve the elemental faith of all people, but defines ecclesiogenesis, which is a word of Leonardo Boff, means the origin of the church or the beginning of the church. He divides the ecclesiogenesis in a more radical way. The church is the church is reborn where faith is born. What is meant by faith here does not immediately refer to the faith in God and Christ, but rather to the mysterious ability of everyone to trust in life, which is elemental faith. So the last point, Theobald also shares the same view as Pope Francis on synodality. He considers synodality as one of the steps of ecclesiogenesis, because synodality is a decentralized way of encountering people, which can activate elemental faith and might be able to orientate non-Christians encountered to the Christian faith. Therefore, Theobald believes that activating others' elemental faith is the first step of Christian mission. Evangelization is a mission of outreach, and going out to meet people means facing differences and walking with people. How to walk with those who are different. Christoph Theobald said, only the art of deliberation and working together can create a sentirgoma, a true sense of community. This art requires a decentralized attitude, that is, listening to others and dialoguing in the Holy Spirit. Thank you for your...
You can say your name, please, before...
All right, thank you to professors for your wonderful speeches. And I'm Clara from mainland China, and now I'm a visiting scholar at ICS. And actually, I have two questions. The first is mainly for Professor Goujon, right? But also for Antoine. In your explanation of this St. Ignatius spiritual exercises, it seems to me that you have resolved the dualistic structure shaped by the history of theology and philosophy and replace it with the concept of movement and process and, how I say, history. And can I understand it in this way that the concept of movement, process, or history plays the role of fundamental principle in the ontological sense? If this is so, it may have the danger of leading to the historical relativism, and there should be a criterion of right and wrong. So that's why I think a static structure is also necessary in your explanation of this, the goal or the end of Ignatius exercises. So that's the first question. And the second question is for Antoine, right? And may I pronounce the name correct? So, and it seems to me that you have put forward a very postmodern style, a way of explaining Christianity, especially the concept of elemental faith. So for me, elemental faith is this kind of secularization of Christian faith. And if considered in this way, it may not have that too many differences between Buddhism or Taoism or other religions in the world. So it seems that you encouraged this period or our society to have this a kind of decentralized Christian faith, which it seems to me it has the danger of forgetting who we really are as Christians. And maybe we are just elaborating dialogues and communication with the religions, and which is good. But still, we have this most important core of Christian faith. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your first question, at least, and the second one is also very interesting. I think they are related, in fact. Your question is really related to what the second generation of Jesuits said about Ignatius. There is a risk. And the big question is, shall we take the risk or face it, or shall we just escape from it? The Jesuit tradition in the 17th century tried to escape it, not to face it, and they get rid of Ignatius. They were not reading the autobiography, they forbid the journal, and they rewrote totally the spiritual exercises in such a way that there were not any movement anymore. bathing, the most important thing was, if you know a bit the spiritual exercises and the decision making, there are three ways of making decision. The first, when it is absolutely obvious, you know what you should do, go ahead. The second one, which is key to Ignatius, was following the movement of consolation and desolation, and from that onward, make your decision when you reach a stable moment in your life. And the third was analyzing the pros and cons, so the reasonable arguments. And Ignatius always said, or suggested at least, it's not that clear, that if you make your decision according to the consolation and desolation movement, you can then try to confirm them if it needs to be confirmed by the third way of making a decision. Then the Jesuits, because they were afraid and because the structure of the church at the moment was 17th century, 16th and 17th century, was based on a hierarchical understanding of the truth, that there were people who knew what the truth is, which is the church, a non-subject topic. There is nobody who is the church. So they assumed that the only way to make a good decision was to follow the reason, which has nothing to do with Ignatius' spirituality. That's a pure Thomistic approach. So then there were a group of Jesuits who remained faithful to this second way of making decision. And they were dubbed or named the mystic. That nothing to do with the Middle Age mysticism. They were named mystic only because they were relying on this consolation and desolation process. So I think there is another risk in your position, if I may say, is to forget that the Holy Spirit, as Ignatius says, move the hierarchy and the church, as well as the persons. And all the point at the moment with the synodal process is to shift from an understanding that the faith is only the faith of the church, which is a technical phrase, towards a communal faith, which is made not only from the hierarchy, but also from the sensus fidei of the church, which is the basic understanding of what the church is. So I think, and what would be to really echo and try to answer your question, I think that there is no risk at all if within your personal journey, spiritual journey with consolation and desolation, which is a normal life, if the standard is the gospel, the life of Jesus Christ, and then to make, in the spiritual exercises, as James said yesterday, it's not just about me, but also the church, the people I meet, the constellation, as Balthasar would say. So, because in my presentation, it was very concentrate, I couldn't develop, but I think that we need, just because it's a gift from the church, to follow the spiritual exercises in these all understanding and presentation, with the consolation and desolation, with the risk of this too individualistic or relativity understanding of the faith. But on the other side, if you have just this straightforward from the top to the bottom, we lived on that in the Western Christianity, and it has almost destroyed the faith. That's the big risk of it. Because in fact, there would be a big discrepancy, a big gap between the real faith of the people of God and an ongoing speech which at the end of the day, doesn't mean anything to anybody apart from the church and the theologian, and not all of them. So I think that's the challenge of our Christian life in general.
Oh, thank you, Laura, for your very interesting question. I say no and yes. Not yes, no, but first no. No, why? Because, in fact, yes, because I have not developed another aspect of Theobald's thoughts. First, I say no, because we cannot oppose elementary faith to Christic faith. Elementary faith, as I explained, is rooted in human nature. It's a gift of creation. So it's not another religion faith. No, it exists in everybody. So, and now, the mission of Christian faith or Christic faith is to serve this elementary faith. Because for Theobald, this elementary faith, which is beauty or goodness of the human nature, can be heightened, or we are not aware of it. So our mission is to evoke, to stimulate, to help them to realize, oh, you have this goodness of human nature. So this is there's no opposition. So our mission is really to serve. That's a decentralized, decentralizing posture, which is linked or continuation of the Trinity's kenotic posture. So secondly, I say yes, there's a danger because I have not said something that Theobald said. Theobald says that if you have elementary faith, that's enough. No need Christian faith. Literally, yeah. Which is correct. There's no heresy in this sentence if you have read the Vatican II. Because in Vatican II, we say only God knows those, no Christians, only God knows the way of their salvation. If they don't have Christian faith, they can be saved, no problem. So if they have only elementary faith, they can be saved, no problem. So of course, some Protestant maybe are not agree, but that's the Catholic teaching. So in this case, his settings, no problem. But if we just stop there, there's a danger because we won't evangelize anymore. But he's a Jesuit, very smart Jesuit. He said, no, the elementary faith can be oriented towards the Christian faith. So your mission, our mission is to evoke elementary faith. Then maybe he can be oriented to Christian faith. So this is the first step of our mission. As if we need the second step of mission, we don't know. So for me, this is really dangerous because for me, we need really the second step of mission. That's to guide them to the Christian faith. Now, that's another question. Yeah.
Okay, Father James, I think. This is a little bit unfair. This is a question, two questions for Antoine. There are two very big questions, so you won't have time to answer them before lunch, but you might have to choose. The first question is, I must say, I very much have come to appreciate Christoph in working on the Synod with him. I'm just becoming more and more aware of his theology, and I've only seen this first volume of his systematics in Italian, and it's, if I remember correctly, it's the Spirit of Holiness, in which he develops a pneumatology. And I just wondered, first question, the easy question I suspect, is would you like to say a little bit more about his pneumatology in that regard? Secondly, the bigger question, which I think affects everything I've been listening to, it's very interesting that all the theologians that we have presented have been remarkably positive about the world and all the rest of it. Yet the exercises root us very firmly in the first week. And I want to know, what does Christoph think about sin? And how does that affect elemental faith, etc.? And that would apply to all the theologians that we've had.
Thank you for that, James.
Maybe,
Really,
Antoine, excuse me. Maybe we can listen the other question and then, yeah.
I'm Hitoshi Kanaka of Sophia University in Tokyo. I have a very small question to Patrick. And in Japan, the body in the spiritual exercise is very popular topic now. But when they speak about the body in the spiritual exercises, they usually mean Zen meditation or an Indian way of praying, for example, Vipassana. Do you have something to say about it?
Do you really mean to say something about it? So, yes, what I'm trying to do is to try to avoid to import practices from outside the spiritual exercises when there are already so many things in it. Just one example. I was part of a retreat in a spiritual center a few months ago, and the man who was leading it, Catholic, he knows the spiritual exercises. He wanted to give us some physical exercise. And what was it? We had to imagine ourselves as birds and flying over the world and experiencing how comfortable it is to dream, which is the opposite of the spiritual exercises. We are not supposed to dream another world than being embodied. And I'm not saying that it is Buddhism, Taoism, not at all, and I don't know anything about it, so I would be more than interested to learn about it, and I think movement could be a connection. But what I'm trying to say is, in the understanding I have from the spiritual exercises today, is that the importance of the body is just to make us aware of the importance of an embodied spiritual life, which I think is totally different from what we do in our Western countries with the body in spirituality at the moment, where it is almost all about well-being. Problem is that the body we have, from the Christian perspective, is the body which will suffer and die, and that you can even suffer because you love someone. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I just answer to the second question of Brother James. It's more interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with you because yeah, I'm too much positive in my presentation. There was Theobald. Yeah, in my dissertation, I really criticized this point. He's too much positive vis-a-vis human nature. Yeah, you are totally. I totally agree with you. Yeah, he's just, you know, elementary faith everybody has, everybody is good, so you should evoke that, that's it. No. We are blessed human nature. I mean, we have a blessed, we have a broken human nature, as many Protestants says. Yeah. So we have to be cured by, you know, by encounter with Christ. Yeah.
On this question, if I may add two little things. The first thing, never forget that Christoph was born just after the Second World War, and he's a German, and he was really appreciative of the reconciliation between France and Germany, and he gave his life to it, and that he has worked a lot on how the Christian could cope with the evil, and his reading of the book of the Revelation in Algeria in the 90s was very important. But at the same time, it's true that he has such a positive way of speaking of humanity that sometimes you wonder, so in which world do you speak from? Because that's not the world in which I'm living.
Thank you very much for this rich time of discussion and shared reflection. I'm sure that we have other questions, but we can continue our dialogue this afternoon.